Clara Brennan's knees hit the frozen ground as the rope burned into her wrists. Blood dripped from her split lip onto the snow, turning it crimson. Behind her, the mob's torches flickered against the December darkness, their voices rising like wolves closing in for the kill. "Hang the widow!" someone screamed. Clara closed her eyes and waited for death. Then a single gunshot split the night air, and a voice she'd never heard before spoke words that would haunt Silver Creek for generations. "The next man who touches her answers to me." Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The morning of December 14th, 1878, began with Clara Brennan doing what she always did. She opened her small seamstress shop on Main Street, lit the potbelly stove against the bitter Montana cold, and waited for customers who would never come. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since anyone in Silver Creek had spoken to her without venom in their voice. 3 weeks since Ida Thornton had whispered the first poison into the town's ear. 3 weeks since Clara's life had become a waking nightmare. The bell above her door jingled, and Clara's heart lifted for one foolish moment. Then she saw who it was. Vincent Thornton stood in her doorway, his expensive coat dusted with snow, his handsome face twisted into something ugly. "Still pretending to run a business." He stepped inside without invitation, tracking slush across her clean floor. "That's precious, Clara. Really precious. Get out." Clara's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she gripped the scissors on her cutting table. "I've got nothing to say to you. Now." Vincent closed the door behind him, and the click of the latch sent ice through Clara's veins. "Is that any way to treat your future husband? I'd sooner marry a rattlesnake." Vincent's smile vanished. "You think you're too good for me. You a widow with a dead husband and a mountain of debt. I said get out. My mother offered you a way out." Vincent moved closer, and Clara backed against her work table. "Marry me. Sign over this property and all your troubles disappear. But you had to be proud. You had to say no. Your mother offered me slavery dressed up as salvation." Clara's fingers found the scissors wrapped around them tight. "And I told her the same thing I'm telling you. No. Not now, not ever." Vincent's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, squeezing until pain lanced up her arm. The scissors clattered to the floor. "You're going to regret that." His breath was hot against her face, sour with whiskey, despite the early hour. "When they string you up for murdering Thomas, you're going to wish you'd been nicer to me. I didn't kill my husband." Clara tried to pull free, but his grip was iron. "Thomas died of fever. Everyone knows that." Everyone knew that. Vincent's smile returned cruel and satisfied. "But my mother's been talking to folks, reminding them how convenient it was that Thomas died right after he took out that life insurance policy. How you were the only one with him when he passed. How you've been struggling to pay off his debts ever since." Clara's blood ran cold. "That's a lie. All of it." "Doesn't matter if it's true." Vincent released her wrist and stepped back, straightening his coat like a gentleman. "What matters is what people believe. And by tomorrow morning, everyone in Silver Creek is going to believe you poisoned your husband for the insurance money." He tipped his hat with mocking courtesy. "Good day, Mrs. Brennan. Enjoy your last night of freedom." The door slammed behind him, and Clara stood frozen in the silence, her wrist throbbing, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She should run. She knew she should run. Take what little money she had and disappear before Ida Thornton's lies took root. But Clara Brennan had never run from anything in her life. She'd buried her parents at 16, married Thomas at 19, nursed him through 2 years of wasting sickness, and held his hand when he took his last breath. She'd worked her fingers raw keeping this shop alive, refusing charity, refusing pity, refusing to let this town see her break. She wasn't about to start running now. That night, Clara locked her shop door at sunset and climbed the narrow stairs to her small apartment above. She ate a cold supper of bread and cheese because she couldn't afford to waste coal on cooking. She mended a tear in her only good dress by candlelight. She said her prayers and climbed into her narrow bed, pulling the thin quilt up to her chin against the December chill. And she told herself that tomorrow would be better. She was wrong. The pounding on her door came before dawn. Clara jolted awake, her heart hammering. For a confused moment, she thought Thomas was calling for water the way he used to during his worst nights. Then, memory crashed over her, and she remembered. Thomas was dead. She was alone, and someone was trying to break down her door. "Open up!" A man's voice, rough and commanding. "Sheriff's business?" Clara scrambled out of bed, pulling her shawl around her nightgown with shaking hands. She barely had the lock turned before the door burst inward, and Sheriff Roy Hutchins filled the frame. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood Deputy Marcus Webb, and behind them both a crowd of townsfolk was gathering in the pre-dawn darkness, their faces lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the snow. "Clara Brennan." The sheriff's voice was flat official, stripped of any warmth. "You're under arrest for the murder of Thomas James Brennan." "What?" The word came out as a whisper. "No, that's insane. Thomas died of fever. Dr. Patterson was there. He signed the death certificate himself. Dr. Patterson has reconsidered his findings." Sheriff Hutchins pulled a pair of iron shackles from his belt. "In light of new evidence." "What evidence?" "There is no evidence because I didn't do anything." "Ma'am, you can come quietly or we can drag you out." The sheriff's eyes were cold. "Your choice." Clara looked past him at the growing crowd. She saw Martha Cooper, who used to bring her pie on Sundays. She saw James Whitfield, whose daughter's wedding dress Clara had sewn just 6 months ago. She saw faces she'd known for years, faces that had smiled at her, thanked her, called her neighbor. Now those faces held nothing but accusation. "Let me dress." Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. "Please, at least let me dress." The sheriff nodded once curtly. "You've got 2 minutes." Clara closed the door and leaned against it, fighting to breathe. This couldn't be happening. This was a nightmare, and any moment she would wake up. But the cold seeping through her thin nightgown was real. The sound of the mob outside was real. And the terror clawing at her chest was the most real thing she'd ever felt. She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons, her mind racing. Ida Thornton had done this. Ida and her poisonous son punishing Clara for daring to refuse them. 2 minutes later, Clara opened her door and stepped out into the December cold with her head held high. The crowd surged forward, and she flinched despite herself. Hands grabbed at her arms, her dress, her hair. Someone spat in her face. Someone else threw a rotted apple that burst against her shoulder. Murderess. Husband killer. Hang her. Sheriff Hutchins pushed through the mob, shackling Clara's wrists in front of her. The iron was so cold it burned, but Clara didn't make a sound. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Move along," the sheriff ordered, gripping her arm. "Everyone clear a path." But the path they cleared led through a gauntlet of hatred. Clara walked with her eyes forward, refusing to look at the faces screaming for her blood. She felt the impact of each insult, each accusation, each piece of garbage thrown at her like physical blows. Halfway to the jailhouse, her foot caught on something, and she stumbled. Before she could catch herself, hands shoved her from behind, and she went down hard, her knees slamming into the frozen ground. Pain exploded through her legs, but worse was the laughter. The crowd was laughing, actually laughing, as she knelt in the dirty snow with blood seeping through her dress. "Look at her." Ida Thornton's voice rang out above the others. Clara would know that voice anywhere, smooth as silk and twice as deadly. "Look at the proud widow now. Not so high and mighty anymore, are you, Mrs. Brennan?" Clara raised her head and found Ida standing at the front of the mob, wrapped in furs that cost more than Clara made in a year. Vincent stood beside his mother, his arms crossed, his smile satisfied. "I didn't kill my husband." Clara's voice cracked, but she forced the words out. "Mrs. Thornton, you know I didn't. You're doing this because I wouldn't marry Vincent, because I wouldn't give you my land." "Listen to her." Ida clutched her chest in theatrical horror, trying to deflect blame onto a grieving mother and her innocent son. Is there no depth to which this woman won't sink? You're lying. Clara struggled to rise, but her bound hands made it impossible. You're all lying and you know it. The evidence speaks for itself. Ida's voice dropped, becoming almost sympathetic. Poor Thomas, poisoned by the woman who swore to love and honor him. And for what? A few $100s of insurance money. That's not true. Take her away, Sheriff. Ida waved a dismissive hand. I can't bear to look at her anymore. Rough hands hauled Clara to her feet. She was dragged the rest of the way to the jailhouse, her legs too numb to support her, her protests drowned out by the mob's continuing abuse. The jail cell was small, barely big enough for the wooden cot and chamber pot it contained. The sheriff shoved Clara inside and slammed the door with a clang that echoed in her bones. Trial's set for noon tomorrow. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Judge Crawford's coming in special from Helena. Sheriff, please. Clara wrapped her fingers around the cold iron bars. You've known me for 3 years. You know I'm not a murderer. I know what the evidence says. He turned away. Get some rest, Mrs. Brennan. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He left, and Clara was alone with the cold and the dark and the crushing weight of her own despair. She didn't sleep. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas's face in those final moments. The fever had taken everything from him by then, left him a hollow shell of the man she'd married. But he'd known her. Even at the end, even when he couldn't remember his own name, he'd known her. Clara. His voice had been barely a whisper. My Clara. Don't cry. Don't cry, sweetheart. I'm just going home. She'd held his hand until it went cold. She'd washed his body herself, dressed him in his Sunday suit, sat with him through the night because she couldn't bear to leave him alone in the dark. And now they were saying she'd killed him. They were saying she'd poisoned the man she'd loved, the man she'd cared for through 2 years of agony, the man she'd have died to save. Clara pressed her face against the cold bars and let herself weep. Morning came gray and bitter with wind howling through the gaps in the jailhouse walls. Clara huddled on her cot, shivering despite the thin blanket the deputy had grudgingly provided. She heard the crowd gathering outside long before she saw them. The voices swelled with each passing hour, more angry, more bloodthirsty. By the time Deputy Webb came to fetch her for the trial, it sounded like the whole town had turned out. Time to go. Webb's face was pale, his eyes darting nervously. He was young, barely 20, and clearly uncomfortable with his role in this farce. Marcus. Clara stood slowly, her joints stiff from the cold. You know this is wrong. You know I'm innocent. The deputy wouldn't look at her. I don't know anything, ma'am. I just follow orders. He led her out into the December morning, and the mob's roar hit her like a physical force. They'd built a gallows. Clara's legs nearly buckled when she saw it. There in the center of Main Street, a wooden platform with a dangling noose stood stark against the gray sky. They'd built it overnight. They'd built it before she'd even had a trial. No. The word escaped her lips without permission. No, this isn't right. This isn't... Move. Deputy Webb's grip on her arm tightened. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The crowd parted to let them through, but barely. Hands reached out to grab at Clara's dress, her hair leaving bruises and tears in their wake. She kept her eyes on the gallows, on the noose that swayed gently in the winter wind, and tried to convince herself this wasn't really happening. The trial, if it could be called that, took place in the Silver Creek Town Hall. Judge Crawford sat behind a makeshift bench, his face stern and unreadable. The jury was 12 men Clara had known for years, neighbors and shopkeepers and farmers, all of them avoiding her eyes. Ida Thornton testified first, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. I'd had my suspicions for months, she said, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. The way Clara hovered over poor Thomas, The way she insisted on preparing all his food herself, never letting anyone else help. And then when Dr. Patterson mentioned the symptoms were consistent with arsenic poisoning. Objection. Clara didn't even have a lawyer, but she couldn't stay silent. Dr. Patterson signed a death certificate saying Thomas died of fever. He never said anything about poison. Dr. Patterson has since revised his professional opinion. Judge Crawford's voice was cold. Sit down, Mrs. Brennan, or I'll have you gagged. Clara sat, her hands clenched so tight, her nails drew blood from her palms. The parade of witnesses continued. Dr. Patterson, looking everywhere but at Clara, mumbled something about unusual symptoms and possible poisoning, without ever explaining why he'd changed his story. Martha Cooper. The same woman who'd brought Clara pies testified that Clara had never seemed quite right, and had an unnatural interest in her husband's life insurance policy. It was lies. All of it obvious, transparent lies. And yet the jury nodded along their faces, grim with righteous judgment. When it was Clara's turn to speak, she stood on shaking legs and faced the crowd. "Thomas was my husband," she said, her voice steady, despite the terror coursing through her. "I loved him. I cared for him through 2 years of sickness, when everyone else had given up hope. I held him when he died and buried him with my own hands." She turned to look at Ida Thornton, at Vincent, smirking beside his mother. "This trial isn't about justice. It's about revenge. I refuse to marry Vincent Thornton. I refuse to sign over my property to his mother. And now they're using all of you to punish me for saying no." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For one desperate moment, Clara thought she'd broken through, thought she'd made them see the truth. Then Ida Thornton laughed. "Listen to her," Ida said, rising from her seat, spinning wild accusations against a grieving family. Is this the defense of an innocent woman, or the desperate lies of a guilty one? "I'm not lying." Clara's voice broke. "She's been trying to take my land for months. She threatened me. Her son threatened me just yesterday, right in my own shop. And yet you have no witnesses to these supposed threats." Ida's smile was poisonous. How convenient. The jury deliberated for less than 10 minutes. "Guilty," the foreman's voice echoed through the silent hall. "On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." Clara heard the word from very far away, as if it were happening to someone else. "Guilty. Clara Brennan." Judge Crawford's voice cut through her daze. "You have been found guilty of the murder of your husband, Thomas James Brennan. You are hereby sentenced to death by hanging to be carried out immediately." Immediately. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. The crowd erupted in cheers. Hands grabbed Clara, lifted her, carried her toward the door. She fought, screaming, kicking, but there were too many of them, and she was so tired, so cold, so broken. They dragged her into the street toward the gallows, toward the noose that waited like a patient predator. "Please." Clara's voice was raw from screaming. "Please, I didn't do this. I'm innocent. Someone please." But no one listened. No one cared. They forced her up the gallows steps. The wooden platform groaned under the weight of so many bodies. Clara felt the rough hemp of the noose as someone slipped it around her neck, felt it tighten against her throat like a lover's cruel embrace. Below her, the crowd stretched as far as she could see. Hundreds of faces, maybe the whole town, gathered to watch her die. And in the front row, Ida Thornton stood with her son, both of them smiling. "Any last words?" Sheriff Hutchins asked, his hand on the lever that would drop the floor beneath her feet. Clara looked out at the sea of hatred, at the people who had been her neighbors, her customers, her community, at the town that was about to murder her for a crime she didn't commit. "I am innocent," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "And may God have mercy on all of you, because I cannot." The sheriff's hand tightened on the lever. Clara closed her eyes, and then a gunshot split the air. The crowd scattered like startled birds, screaming and stumbling over each other in their panic. Clara's eyes flew open, her heart slamming against her ribs. A man on horseback had appeared at the edge of the square. No, not appeared. He'd been there all along, she realized. She just hadn't seen him through the crowd. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, dressed in a heavy coat dusted with snow. A rifle rested across his thighs, smoke still curling from its barrel. But it was his face that held Clara's attention. A scar ran down his left cheek, pale against weathered skin. His eyes were gray-cold as the winter sky, and they swept across the crowd with the calm assessment of a man who had seen violence before and wasn't afraid of it. "I said," the stranger repeated, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, "the next man who touches her answers to me." Sheriff Hutchins stepped forward, his hand on his pistol. "Now hold on just a minute. This is an official execution authorized by... I don't care if it's authorized by the president himself." The stranger guided his horse forward, and the crowd parted before him like water. "That woman isn't dying today." "You can't just..." "Nathaniel Prescott." The stranger's name fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Clara saw recognition flash across the sheriff's face, saw him go pale. "My name is Nathaniel Prescott, and I'm claiming this woman under territorial law." The murmurs that swept through the crowd were different now, frightened, uncertain. Clara had never heard the name Nathaniel Prescott before, but from the way the townspeople were backing away, from the way even Ida Thornton's smug smile had faltered, she understood that everyone else had. "Mr. Prescott." Sheriff Hutchins licked his lips nervously. "Sir, I know who you are, and I respect your position, but this woman has been legally convicted of murder. I can't just let her go." "Then it's a good thing I'm not asking you to let her go." Prescott dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots crunching in the snow. He climbed the gallows steps with the ease of a man climbing his own front porch, and the men standing near Clara scrambled to get out of his way. Up close, he was even more imposing. Taller than she'd realized, with shoulders that blocked out what little light the gray sky provided. The scar on his cheek was old and ragged, the kind of wound that should have killed the man who wore it. He stopped in front of Clara, and those gray eyes met hers. "Ma'am." His voice was lower now, meant only for her. "I'm going to take that noose off your neck. Then I'm going to take you out of here. Do you understand?" Clara's throat was too tight to speak. She nodded. Prescott's hands were surprisingly gentle as he loosened the rope and lifted it over her head. The relief was so intense she nearly collapsed, but his arm came around her waist, steadying her. "I've got you," he said quietly. "I've got you." "Mr. Prescott." Ida Thornton's voice cut through the stunned silence. "I demand to know what you think you're doing." Prescott turned, keeping Clara tucked against his side. "Mrs. Thornton, I might have known you'd be at the center of this particular circus. This woman is a convicted murderess. She killed her husband, and she deserves to hang." "This woman," Prescott said, his voice hardening, "is my fiancée, and I don't take kindly to people trying to execute my future wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Clara stared up at the stranger, certain she'd misheard. Fiancé. She'd never seen this man before in her life. But Prescott's arm tightened around her waist in warning, and she understood. Whatever game he was playing, her survival depended on going along with it. "That's impossible," Ida spluttered. "I've never seen you two together. No one has. She's been living alone since her husband died." "We've been corresponding for months." Prescott's voice was smooth, utterly confident. "Clara and I met when I was passing through last spring. We've been planning our wedding ever since. I was delayed getting here by business in Helena, but I came as soon as I heard she was in trouble." "Lies." Vincent Thornton pushed forward, his face flushed with rage. "She never mentioned any engagement. She never mentioned you at all. A lady doesn't discuss her private affairs with strangers." Prescott's gray eyes fixed on Vincent, and something dangerous flickered in their depths. Especially not with men who make unwanted advances. Vincent went pale. "Now." Prescott addressed the crowd, his voice carrying easily. "I understand there's been some misunderstanding about my fiancée's role in her late husband's death. I intend to look into the matter personally. Until then, Clara will be staying at my ranch under my protection." You can't just, Ida began. Mrs. Thornton. Prescott's voice could have frozen the sun. I can do whatever I please. My ranch employs half the men in this territory. My cattle feed the army. My name carries weight from here to Washington. If you want to make an enemy of me, you're welcome to try. But I'd think very carefully before you do. No one spoke. Prescott turned back to Clara, his expression softening slightly. Can you walk? Yes. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. I think so. He helped her down the gallows steps, keeping her close against him. The crowd parted before them, no one daring to meet Prescott's eyes. His horse waited where he'd left it, a massive bay that looked as dangerous as its rider. Prescott lifted Clara onto its back as if she weighed nothing, then mounted behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist. We're leaving now, he said to no one in particular. Anyone who follows us will regret it. No one moved. Prescott turned the horse toward the edge of town, toward the mountain road that led north. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he rode away with Clara Brennan held against his chest. Clara herself was too shocked to speak, too exhausted to do anything but lean against the stranger's solid warmth and try to process what had just happened. 5 minutes ago, she'd been about to die. Now she was riding into the unknown with a man she'd never met toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. Who are you? She finally managed, her voice cracking. Why did you do that? Prescott was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost human. My name is Nathaniel Prescott. I own a ranch about an hour north of here, and I saved you because no one else was going to. But you don't know me. You don't know if I'm innocent or guilty. Why would you risk everything for a stranger? Another silence. Longer this time, because I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. His arm tightened around her almost imperceptibly. And I swore I'd never let it happen again. Clara wanted to ask more, wanted to understand this strange, scarred man who had appeared like an avenging angel at the moment of her greatest despair. But exhaustion was pulling at her, and the warmth of his body was the first warmth she'd felt in hours. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. His voice was grim. Ida Thornton isn't going to let this go. Neither is her son. What happened today was just the beginning. Then why save me at all? Prescott didn't answer for a long time. The horse carried them steadily north, away from Silver Creek, away from the gallows, away from everything Clara had ever known. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet, she almost didn't hear it. Because everyone deserves a fighting chance. Even the ones the world has given up on. Clara closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the horse's movement carry her toward whatever came next. She was alive. Against all odds, against all hope, she was alive. And for now, that was enough. The ride to Nathaniel Prescott's ranch took nearly 2 hours through bitter wind and driving snow. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion it had been fighting since the sheriff's men had dragged her from her bed. Each time she woke, she found herself still pressed against Prescott's chest, his arm still wrapped securely around her waist. He hadn't spoken since his quiet words about fighting chances. Neither had she. What was there to say? She didn't know this man. Didn't understand why he'd risked his reputation, possibly his life, for a stranger convicted of murder. The questions burned in her throat, but she was too tired to voice them. When the horse finally slowed, Clara forced her eyes open. A large house materialized through the falling snow, and lights glowed warm in the windows. People were moving toward them, voices calling out. Mr. Nate, you're back. Is that her? Is that the woman from town? Get Dolores. Tell her to heat water and prepare the guest room. Prescott dismounted first, then reached up to lift Clara down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched the ground, and he caught her easily, sweeping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. I can walk, Clara protested weakly. No, you can't. His voice left no room for argument. "You're half frozen, and you haven't slept in 2 days. Save your pride for when you can stand without falling." Clara wanted to argue, but the warmth of being carried, of being held, was too seductive. She let her head fall against his shoulder and closed her eyes. She was vaguely aware of being carried inside of voices swirling around her, of someone speaking rapid Spanish. Then she was being lowered onto something soft and gentle. Hands were removing her ruined dress. "Pobrecita." A woman's voice, warm and musical. "What did they do to you?" Clara tried to answer, but sleep claimed her before she could form the words. She dreamed of the gallows, of the rope around her neck tightening, of faces screaming for her death, of Thomas's voice calling her name from somewhere she couldn't reach. When she woke, she was screaming, "Easy, easy." Hands pressed her shoulders down, firm but gentle. "You're safe. You're at the Prescott Ranch. No one can hurt you here." Clara's eyes flew open. A woman sat beside her bed, Mexican, perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and kind dark eyes. She held a damp cloth and was pressing it to Clara's forehead. "Where?" Clara's voice cracked. "Where am I?" "You are in Mr. Nate's house." The woman's accent was soft, musical. "I am Dolores. I have been taking care of this family for 30 years, and now I will take care of you." Clara tried to sit up, but her body screamed in protest. Every muscle ached. Her wrists throbbed where the shackles had bitten into her skin. Her knees felt like they'd been crushed. "How long have I been asleep?" 2 days. 2 days. Clara's heart lurched. I need to. You need to rest." Dolores pressed her back down with surprising strength. "Mr. Nate's orders. You are not to leave this bed until you can stand without falling over. But Silver Creek, the Thorntons, will still be there when you are healed." Dolores's voice softened. "Rest now, child. Whatever demons chase you, they cannot reach you here." Clara wanted to argue. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to do something other than lie helpless in a stranger's bed. But her body had other ideas. Before she could form another protest, sleep dragged her back down into darkness. The next time she woke, the room was filled with gray morning light, and Nathaniel Prescott was sitting in a chair beside her bed. He looked different without his heavy coat. Smaller somehow, though still imposingly tall. He wore a simple white shirt and dark trousers, and his scarred face was thoughtful as he watched her wake. "How do you feel?" His voice was low, careful, as if he was afraid of startling her. "Like I've been trampled by a horse." Clara pushed herself up against the pillows, wincing. "Or hanged. Almost hanged." Something flickered in Prescott's gray eyes. Pain, maybe. Or anger. It was gone before she could identify it. "Dolores says you'll recover fully. The bruises will fade. The rest—" He trailed off. "The rest will take longer." Clara finished for him. She met his eyes directly. "Why did you save me?" Prescott didn't answer immediately. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "I told you. Everyone deserves a fighting chance." "That's not an answer. That's a philosophy. I want to know why you specifically saved me specifically. You don't know me. You don't know if I'm innocent. For all you know, I really did poison my husband." "Did you?" The question was quiet, almost casual, but Clara felt its weight. "No." Her voice was steady. "Thomas died of fever. I held his hand for 2 years while that fever ate him alive. I would have given anything to save him. Anything." Prescott turned back to face her. "I believe you." "Why, you just met me." "Because I knew your husband." Clara's breath caught. "What?" "Thomas Brennan." Prescott moved back to his chair and sat down heavily. "He served under me during the war. Good man, honest, the kind of soldier who'd give you his last biscuit if you were hungry." He paused. "He wrote to me, you know, after he got sick. Told me about his wife. How she was the best thing that ever happened to him. How she was nursing him through the worst of it when everyone else had given up." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "He never mentioned you." He wouldn't have. Thomas was a private man. Didn't like to talk about the war. Prescott's voice was rough. I got one last letter from him about a month before he died. He knew it was coming. Asked me to look after you if anything happened. Then why didn't you come sooner? The words burst out before Clara could stop them, anger and grief tangling in her chest. Why did you wait until they had a noose around my neck? Because I didn't know. Prescott's eyes met hers, and she saw genuine anguish there. I was in Helena. My foreman told me what was happening in Silver Creek 3 days ago. I rode through the night to get here. His jaw tightened. I was almost too late. Clara stared at him, trying to reconcile this new information with everything she thought she knew. Thomas had never mentioned serving in the war. Never mentioned Nathaniel Prescott. But then Thomas had never mentioned a lot of things. He'd been a man of silences, carrying wounds he never spoke of. So, you claimed me as your fiancé to honor a dead man's wish. I claimed you as my fiancé because it was the only way to get you off that gallows. Prescott leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Mrs. Thornton has Judge Crawford in her pocket. She's got half the town council, too. A simple rescue wouldn't have stuck. They'd have found another way to get to you. And being engaged to you protects me how... My name carries weight. Anyone who moves against you now moves against me, and nobody in this territory wants that fight. He paused. But the protection only lasts as long as the engagement seems legitimate. If people start to doubt, they'll come for me again. Clara finished. Yes. Clara was quiet for a long moment, processing. So what are you proposing, that we pretend to be engaged indefinitely? I'm proposing we actually get married. The words hung in the air between them. Clara's heart stopped, then started again with a painful lurch. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. Prescott's voice was calm, measured. Marriage gives you legal protection that an engagement can't. It makes you a Prescott, puts you under my authority in the eyes of the law. Ida Thornton can't touch you if you're my wife. But you don't know me. Clara heard her voice rising and couldn't stop it. I don't know you. Marriage it's forever. It's sacred. It's not something you do to avoid inconvenience. Mrs. Brennan. Prescott's voice sharpened. 3 days ago, you were standing on a gallows with a rope around your neck. The woman who put you there isn't going to stop just because I pulled you down. She wants your land, she wants revenge, and she's willing to let you die to get both. This isn't about inconvenience. This is about survival. Clara felt the words like a slap. She looked down at her bruised wrists, at the raw skin where the shackles had torn into her flesh. I won't be a burden. Her voice was barely a whisper. I won't be charity. Good, because I'm not offering charity. Prescott stood and moved to a bureau near the window. He pulled out a folder and brought it back to the bed. This is a contract. I had my lawyer draw it up yesterday. It guarantees you financial independence, property rights, and the freedom to leave the marriage if you choose. If I die, you inherit 1/3 of my estate outright. If you decide after a year that you want out, you can have the marriage annulled with a settlement that will keep you comfortable for life. Clara took the folder with trembling hands. The document inside was dense with legal language, but even a cursory glance showed that Prescott wasn't lying. These terms were more than generous. They were extraordinary. Why would you agree to this? She looked up at him, searching his scarred face for some hidden agenda. What do you get out of it? Prescott was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost vulnerable. I'm 34 years old. I've got more land and cattle than I know what to do with. I've got money in 3 different banks and a house with 12 empty rooms. And I've got nobody to share any of it with. He moved back to the window, staring out at something she couldn't see. My brother died 10 years ago. Bandits hit our ranch while I was away. I found him in the barn with 3 bullets in his chest. I've been alone ever since. I'm sorry. Clara's voice was barely audible. I'm not asking you to love me. Prescott turned back to face her. I'm not even asking you to like me particularly. I'm asking you to consider a partnership. You need protection. I need... He stopped seeming to search for the right word. I need a reason to come home at night that isn't just an empty house and old ghosts. Clara looked down at the contract in her hands. Her mind was spinning, trying to process everything she'd learned in the past 10 minutes. Thomas had known this man, had trusted him enough to ask him to look after her, had written him letters she'd never seen, shared pieces of himself he'd never shared with her, and now this stranger was offering her everything she needed. Safety, security, a future. All she had to do was tie herself to a man she'd known for less than a week. Can I think about it? Her voice came out small. I know you've put yourself at risk for me, and I'm grateful. But it's a lot. I need time to... Take all the time you need. Prescott headed for the door. I've got ranch business that'll keep me busy for the next few days. Dolores will take care of you. When you're ready to talk, send for me. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her. Mrs. Brennan, whatever you decide, know this: you're safe here. Nobody gets onto this ranch without my permission, and nobody touches what's mine. For as long as you're under my roof, you're under my protection. Engagement or no engagement. Marriage or no marriage. Do you understand? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Prescott left, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara sat alone in the big bed, clutching the contract to her chest, and tried to figure out what on earth she was supposed to do next. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended rhythm. Clara slept, ate the rich food Dolores brought her, and slowly recovered her strength. Her bruises faded from purple to yellow-green. Her wrists healed enough that she could use her hands without wincing. Her mind, though, remained in turmoil. She saw little of Prescott during this time. He was out with his men from dawn until well after dark, dealing with some crisis involving cattle and an early blizzard. But she learned about him from Dolores, who seemed determined to sing his praises at every opportunity. He was wild when he came here, Dolores told her one evening, helping Clara into a borrowed dress that actually fit. Angry, full of grief for his brother. He worked himself half to death building this ranch. I thought the work would kill him before the grief did. But it didn't. No, he survived. He always survives that one. Dolores's dark eyes were thoughtful. But surviving is not the same as living. You understand, he built walls around himself. Shut everyone out. These past 10 years I have watched him turn to stone. Why are you telling me this? Dolores smiled, her weathered face creasing with warmth. Because the day he brought you here, I saw something I had not seen in a decade. I saw him afraid. Not for himself, for you. Clara didn't know what to say to that. On the 4th day, she felt strong enough to venture out of her room. Dolores tried to protest, but Clara had never been good at staying still, and the walls were closing in on her. The house was even larger than she'd realized. 12 rooms, Prescott had said, and he hadn't been exaggerating. She wandered through a parlor filled with comfortable furniture and walls lined with books, a dining room that could seat 20, a kitchen where Dolores and 2 younger women worked amid clouds of fragrant steam. She found Prescott's study by accident. The door was ajar, and curiosity drew her inside before propriety could stop her. It was a masculine space, all dark wood and leather. A massive desk dominated one wall, covered in papers and ledgers. Maps hung on the walls marked with notes she couldn't read from this distance. But it was the photograph on the desk that caught her attention. 2 young men stood side by side, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the invincible confidence of youth. One of them was clearly Prescott younger, and unscarred, his gray eyes bright with laughter. The other looked so much like him they could have been twins. That's Daniel. Clara spun, her heart lurching. Prescott stood in the doorway, snow still melting on his shoulders. She hadn't heard him come in. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. The door was open and It's fine. He moved past her into the room, shrugging off his heavy coat. You're not a prisoner here, Mrs. Brennan. You can go wherever you like. Clara turned back to the photograph. He looks like you. He was my younger brother, 2 years between us. Prescott's voice was carefully neutral. That photograph was taken the day he turned 21. 3 months later, he was dead. Dolores told me. About the bandits. Did she? It wasn't a question. She said you found him. Prescott was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I was in town, getting supplies. I was supposed to be back before sunset, but I stopped at the saloon. Had a few drinks. Talked to some friends. His hands clenched at his sides. By the time I got home, they were gone, and Daniel was lying in the barn with his blood frozen in the hay. That wasn't your fault. No. Prescott turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes was staggering. I was supposed to protect him. I was the older brother. That was my job. And instead I was drinking whiskey while strangers put 3 bullets in his chest. You couldn't have known. I should have been there. The words came out harsh final. I should have been there, and I wasn't, and nothing will ever change that. Clara recognized the guilt in his voice. She'd heard it in her own often enough over the past 3 weeks. The endless litany of should-haves and could-haves that plagued anyone who'd lost someone they loved. Is that why you saved me? She asked quietly. To make up for not saving him. Prescott's jaw tightened. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. Clara moved close enough to see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Because if you're trying to save me to ease your own guilt, this won't work. I won't be your redemption, Mr. Prescott. I won't be anyone's salvation but my own. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. You don't pull your punches, do you, Mrs. Brennan? I spent 2 years watching my husband die. I don't have time for games or pretense. So let me ask you again, why did you really save me? Prescott was silent for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk and picked up the photograph, staring down at his brother's frozen smile. Thomas told me in that last letter that you were the strongest woman he'd ever known. He said you'd nursed him through things that would have broken anyone else. He said you never complained, never wavered, never let him see you cry. He set the photograph down carefully. I thought about that a lot after he died. Wondered what kind of woman could love someone that hard, that completely. He turned to face her. When I rode into Silver Creek and saw them dragging you toward that gallows, I knew. You were walking to your death with your head high. You weren't begging, weren't crying. You were just standing there, refusing to let them see you break. His voice dropped. That's when I knew I had to save you, not because of guilt, not because Thomas asked me to, because the world doesn't have enough people like you in it, and I couldn't watch another one die. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. I've made my decision. Prescott's expression didn't change, but she saw his shoulders tense. And... Clara walked to the desk and picked up the contract she'd left there that morning. She'd read it cover to cover 3 times. Had Dolores explain the parts she didn't understand. I'll marry you. She met his eyes steadily. But I have conditions. Name them. First, I won't be decorative. I need work purpose. If I'm going to live here, I need something to do besides embroider cushions and host tea parties. Done. The ranch always needs help. And if you want to teach, I can build a schoolhouse. Half my workers have children who've never seen the inside of a classroom. Clara blinked. She hadn't expected such an immediate agreement. Second, I won't share your bed until... She felt heat climb her cheeks, but forced herself to continue. Until we know each other better. Until this feels like a real marriage, instead of a business arrangement. Agreed. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't touch you unless you ask me to. Third, I want to clear my name, not just hide behind yours. I want to prove I didn't kill Thomas. I want Ida Thornton to answer for what she did. This time, Prescott smiled. It was a cold smile, sharp as a blade. Mrs. Brennan, I was hoping you'd say that. Because I've already started looking into Mrs. Thornton's affairs, and what I've found is very interesting indeed. Clara's heart quickened. What do you mean? I mean that your husband wasn't the first person connected to the Thorntons to die under suspicious circumstances. And I mean that Ida's son Vincent has gambling debts that would make your eyes water. You think they killed Thomas. I think they had motive. Your land sits directly between two parcels the Thorntons have been trying to acquire for years. With you out of the way, that land would have gone to auction. Vincent could have bought it for pennies. Clara felt her knees go weak. She sank into the nearest chair. All of this, everything they did to me, it was about land. It's always about land out here. Prescott's voice was grim. Or money, or power, usually all three. Clara stared at her hands, processing. If what Prescott said was true, then Ida Thornton hadn't just tried to frame her for murder. She'd actually committed murder. Thomas hadn't died of fever. He'd been poisoned by the same people who'd tried to hang Clara for the crime. I'm going to destroy her. Clara's voice was quiet, cold, utterly certain. I'm going to take everything she has and burn it to the ground. Not alone, you're not. Prescott moved around his desk and crouched in front of her chair, putting them at eye level. We do this together. We plan, we gather evidence, we wait for the right moment. And then we strike. Together. Clara tested the word. It felt strange on her tongue. She'd been alone for so long. That's what partners do. Prescott extended his hand. Do we have a deal, Mrs. Brennan? Clara looked at his hand, at the calluses earned through years of hard work, at the scars that spoke of violence survived. Then she looked at his face, at those gray eyes that held more pain than she'd first realized. She took his hand. Clara, she said, if we're going to be married, you should probably call me Clara. Prescott's grip tightened around hers. Clara, I'm Nathaniel, but most people call me Nate. Nate. She nodded slowly. I think this might actually work. I know it will. He released her hand and stood. Now, how do you feel about meeting the rest of the ranch? Because in about 10 minutes my foreman is going to walk through that door with 20 questions about the woman I've brought home, and I'd rather have you beside me when I answer them. Clara rose from her chair, straightening her borrowed dress. Her body still ached. Her heart still hurt. But for the first time since the sheriff's men had dragged her from her bed, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. Lead the way, she said. I've faced worse than curious cowboys. Nate laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his scarred face. You know what, Clara, I believe you have. They walked out of the study together and into whatever came next. The wedding took place on a bitter December morning, exactly 1 week after Nate had pulled Clara from the gallows. Reverend Josiah Cole performed the ceremony in the parlor of the Prescott Ranch with Dolores as witness, and a fire crackling in the hearth. Clara wore a simple dress of dark blue wool, borrowed from Dolores, and altered to fit her smaller frame. Her hands trembled as she spoke her vows, but her voice was steady. She'd made her choice. There was no going back now. I now pronounce you man and wife. Reverend Cole's voice was gentle, his eyes kind. He was one of the few people from Silver Creek who had dared visit the ranch, bringing news and quiet support. You may kiss your bride. Nate turned to Clara, and for a moment uncertainty flickered across his scarred face. They hadn't discussed this part, hadn't talked about how to navigate the physical realities of marriage when the emotional connection was still so fragile. Clara solved the problem by rising on her toes and pressing a brief, chaste kiss to his cheek. Thank you, she whispered too quietly for the others to hear. Nate's hand found hers and squeezed gently. Thank me when we've won. After the ceremony, Reverend Cole stayed for dinner. He was a thin man in his 50s with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much suffering. Over Dolores's excellent beef stew, he shared what he knew about the situation in Silver Creek. The Thorntons are furious, he said, keeping his voice low, even though they were miles from town. Ida's been telling everyone who'll listen that you kidnapped Clara, that you're holding her against her will. Let her talk. Nate's voice was flat. Nobody believes her. Some do. The ones who owe her money mostly. And Vincent's been making threats. Says he's going to ride out here and take back what's his. Clara felt her spine stiffen. I was never his. I know that, Mrs. Prescott. Reverend Cole's use of her new name sent a strange shiver through her. But Vincent Thornton isn't known for accepting rejection gracefully. You should be careful. She will be. Nate's hand closed over Clara's on the table. I've got men watching every approach to this ranch. If Vincent Thornton so much as sets foot on my property, he'll regret it. After the Reverend left, Clara found herself alone with her new husband for the first time since the ceremony. They stood in the parlor, the fire dying down, the weight of their new reality settling over them like snow. I had Dolores prepare a room for you, Nate said, breaking the silence. Across the hall from mine. It has its own entrance if you want privacy. Thank you. Clara smoothed her hands over her borrowed dress. I know this isn't what you expected when you asked Thomas to let you look after me. I didn't expect any of this. Nate moved to the fireplace, adding another log to the embers. But I don't regret it. Do you? Clara considered the question seriously. A week ago, she'd been standing on a gallows waiting to die. Now she was married to one of the wealthiest men in Montana, living in a house bigger than anything she'd ever imagined, with a future that stretched beyond the next terrifying hour. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. Nate turned to face her, the firelight casting shadows across his scarred cheek. I meant what I said in my study. I won't touch you unless you ask me to. This marriage can be whatever you need it to be. And what do you need it to be? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was silent for a long moment. I need it to be real, he said finally. Eventually. I need to know that you're here because you want to be, not just because you had nowhere else to go. Clara felt something shift in her chest. This hard, scarred man who had saved her life was asking her for hope, asking her to believe that their strange arrangement could become something more. I can't promise you love, she said quietly. Not yet. I barely know you. But I can promise you honesty and effort and the chance to see where this goes. Nate nodded slowly. That's enough. For now. They stood there in the firelight, husband and wife strangers bound together by circumstance and choice. Clara didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid to find out. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Clara threw herself into work, refusing to be idle. She helped Dolores in the kitchen, learning recipes she'd never had ingredients for as a poor seamstress's wife. She mended clothes for the ranch hands, her skilled fingers making quick work of torn shirts and frayed hems. She began organizing Nate's chaotic study, bringing order to years of neglected paperwork. And slowly, carefully, she and Nate began to know each other. They ate breakfast together every morning, a habit Clara had insisted on. She learned that Nate took his coffee black and couldn't stomach eggs. He learned that she read everything she could get her hands on and had opinions about politics that would scandalize polite society. They ate dinner together every evening, and their conversations grew longer, deeper. Nate told her about his years as a Texas Ranger, about the violence he'd seen and done. Clara told him about nursing Thomas through his illness, about the slow agony of watching someone you love disappear piece by piece. I was relieved when he died. Clara admitted one night, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. God help me, I was relieved. Does that make me a monster? It makes you human. Nate's voice was gentle in the darkness. Watching someone suffer is its own kind of torture. Wanting it to end doesn't mean you didn't love him. I did love him. Not the way I'd dreamed of loving a husband, maybe. We married for practical reasons, Thomas and me, but I grew to care for him, deeply. I know. Nate reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Thomas knew it too. He wrote about it in his letters. How lucky he was to have found you. Clara felt tears sting her eyes, but she didn't pull away from his touch. Tell me more, about what he wrote. So Nate did. He told her about Thomas's letters describing their life together, the small kindnesses Clara had shown, the strength she'd displayed when everything was falling apart. Through his words, Clara learned things about her own marriage she'd never known, saw herself through her husband's eyes, understood how much she'd meant to a man who'd never been good at saying it out loud. And somewhere in those late-night conversations, something began to change between her and Nate. The formality faded. The awkwardness eased. They began to feel less like strangers sharing a house, and more like partners building something together. 2 weeks after the wedding, Nate came home from town with news. "I found something." He strode into the study where Clara was organizing his correspondence, his face tight with controlled anger. "About the Thorntons." Clara set down the letter she'd been sorting. "What is it?" Nate pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it to her. It was a ledger page covered in cramped handwriting. "I have a contact at the bank in Helena. He owes me a favor. I asked him to look into Vincent Thornton's finances." Clara scanned the page, her eyes widening. "These debts. This can't be right. He owes money to half the gambling halls in the territory." "Nearly $20,000. Nate's voice was grim. "And those are just the debts we know about. There are rumors of more owed to people who don't keep official records." "How is that possible? The Thorntons are wealthy." "The Thorntons were wealthy. Old man Thornton left everything to Ida when he died, but she's been hemorrhaging money for years. Bad investments, Vincent's gambling trying to maintain the illusion of prosperity." Nate took the ledger page back. "They're desperate, Clara. That's why they came after you. Your land isn't just valuable. It's the key to a deal they've been trying to make with the railroad." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "The railroad?" "There's a new line being planned. It'll run right through Silver Creek if the investors can acquire enough land for the depot and switching yards. The Thorntons have been buying up property along the proposed route, but they're missing one crucial piece." "My shop." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "It sits right on Main Street, right where they'd need to build. Without your land, the deal falls through. The investors go elsewhere, and the Thorntons lose everything." Clara sank into the nearest chair, her mind reeling. All of it, the accusations, the trial, the attempted execution, had been about money. About land. About a railroad deal she'd never even heard of. "They killed Thomas." The words came out flat, certain. "They poisoned him so they could take my land." "I believe so. Yes." "Can we prove it?" Nate's expression darkened. "Not yet, but I'm working on it. There's a doctor in Helena who specializes in poison cases. I've asked him to review the symptoms Thomas displayed before he died. If we can establish that he was poisoned, we can start building a case." "And what then? Who would prosecute them?" "The sheriff is in their pocket. The judge is in their pocket. The whole town." "Is not the whole territory." Nate crouched in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "There are federal marshals, Clara. Territorial judges who can't be bought. If we build a strong enough case, we can take it over the Thorntons' heads." Clara looked into his gray eyes and saw the determination there. He wasn't just doing this for her anymore. He believed in it. Believed in justice, in truth, in making things right. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to remember everything you can about Thomas's final weeks. Every meal he ate, every visitor he had, every moment that seemed strange or out of place. We need to establish a timeline." Clara nodded slowly. "There was a woman. A few weeks before Thomas died. She came to the shop, said she was collecting for the church. I let her in. I left her alone with Thomas while I went to get my donation." "What did she look like?" "Older. Gray hair. Thin face." Clara's hands tightened on his. "I didn't recognize her. And afterward I never saw her at church. I thought it was strange, but Thomas was getting worse by then, and I forgot about it." "Could you describe her to a sketch artist?" "I think so. Yes." Nate stood, his expression hard with purpose. "Then that's our next step. I'll send to Helena for someone who can draw from description. We find that woman, we find our link to the Thorntons." He started toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Clara, whatever happens next, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Most people would have crumbled after what you've been through, but you're still standing, still fighting." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'm not fighting alone anymore." "No." Nate's voice was rough. "You're not." The sketch artist arrived 3 days later, a young man from Helena named Peter Walsh, who had a gift for capturing faces from description. Clara spent hours with him dredging up every detail she could remember about the mysterious churchwoman. The result was a portrait that made her blood run cold. "I know her." Dolores's voice was barely a whisper. She'd come to bring coffee, and had frozen at the sight of the sketch. "That's Martha Griggs. She used to work for the Thorntons. She was let go about 6 months ago. Do you know where she is now?" "Last I heard, she moved to a boarding house in Butte, trying to find work." Nate was already reaching for his coat. "I'll leave first thing in the morning." "I'm coming with you." Clara stood, her voice firm. "Clara, it's a 2-day ride. In winter. It's dangerous." "I don't care. This is about my husband, my life. I need to be there." For a moment she thought he would argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him, because he simply nodded. "All right. We leave at dawn. Dress warm." They rode out before sunrise. Nate on his bay gelding, and Clara on a gentle mare Dolores had chosen for her. The cold was brutal, the wind cutting through even the warmest layers, but Clara refused to complain. She'd faced worse. She would face worse still. They stopped the first night at a way station, a rough building that offered little more than a roof and a fire. Clara huddled close to the flames, too cold to feel self-conscious about the way Nate wrapped his coat around her shoulders. "You should have stayed at the ranch," he said, his breath pluming white in the frozen air. "Probably." Clara pulled the coat tighter. "But I'm glad I didn't." "Why?" She considered the question. "Because I spent 2 years watching Thomas die. 2 years feeling helpless, unable to do anything but hold his hand and wait. I won't feel that way again. Whatever happens next, I want to be part of it." Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're nothing like I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone softer, maybe. Someone who needed protecting." "I do need protecting." Clara met his eyes in the firelight. "But I need purpose more. I need to know that my life means something beyond just survival." "It does." Nate's voice was rough. "Clara, your life means... it means..." He trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. Clara felt her heart quicken. "What? It means something to me." The admission came out harsh, almost angry. "I didn't expect that. I didn't want it. But somewhere between pulling you off that gallows and now you became... important. To me." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. Not from sadness this time, but from something else entirely. "Nate, you don't have to say anything." He stood abruptly, moving away from the fire. "I know it's too soon. I know you married me for protection, not for love. I just needed you to know." Clara rose and followed him, catching his arm before he could retreat further. "I spent 2 years watching the man I was supposed to love waste away. I told myself I would never be that vulnerable again. Never let anyone matter that much." She moved around to face him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "But you matter, Nate. Against my better judgment, against everything I told myself, you matter." Something shifted in his expression. Hope, maybe. Or fear. Perhaps both. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's gratitude or convenience or something more. But I know that when I think about the future, you're in it. And that terrifies me." "It terrifies me too." His voice was barely audible. "I've been alone for 10 years. I don't know how to be anything else." "Then we'll learn together." Clara reached up and touched his scarred cheek, feeling him flinch at the contact before slowly relaxing into her palm. "That's what partners do." Nate's hand came up to cover hers, pressing her touch more firmly against his face. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "Let me be the judge of that." They stood there in the cold, two broken people, finding something unexpected in each other. Not love, not yet. But the possibility of love. The hope of it. And for now, that was enough. They reached Butte the following evening, exhausted and frozen, but determined. It took only a few hours of asking at boarding houses to find Martha Griggs. She was a small woman, older than the sketch had suggested, with hunched shoulders and frightened eyes. When Clara and Nate appeared at her door, she tried to close it in their faces. Nate caught the door with one hand. "Mrs. Griggs, we just want to talk." "I don't know anything," the woman said, her voice shaking. "I don't know anything about anything." "You visited my husband." Clara stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the rage churning in her chest. "Thomas Brennan. You came to our shop, pretended to be collecting for the church. A few weeks later, he was dead." Martha's face went white. I never... We're not here to hurt you." Clara forced herself to speak gently. "We're here to understand what happened. If someone made you do something, told you it was harmless, we need to know." The woman's eyes darted between them, terrified. "They'll kill me," she whispered. "If I talk, they'll kill me." "Who?" Nate's voice was hard. "Who will kill you, bae? The Thorntons." The name came out like a curse. "Mrs. Thornton and that son of hers. They made me do it. They said it was just medicine. They said it would help the man sleep. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Clara felt her knees buckle. Nate caught her, held her upright. "What did they give you?" His voice was ice. "What did you put in his food?" Martha was crying now, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Arsenic. A little bit every day. Mrs. Thornton said it would look like fever. Said no one would ever know. She paid me $50 and promised more if I kept quiet. And when they tried to hang me for his murder..." Clara's voice shook with fury. "Did you keep quiet then, too?" "I wanted to speak up. I swear I did, but Vincent came to see me. He said if I told anyone he'd make sure I disappeared. He said there are places in the mountains where no one would ever find a body." Clara stared at the woman who had murdered her husband, who had stood by while Clara was dragged to the gallows, who had kept silent while an innocent woman nearly died for a crime she'd committed. She wanted to hate her, wanted to scream, to strike, to unleash the fury that had been building since the moment Sheriff Hutchins had pounded on her door. But looking at Martha's terrified, guilt-ridden face, Clara saw something else. A woman trapped by circumstances beyond her control. A woman who'd been used by people far more powerful than herself. It didn't excuse what she'd done. Nothing could excuse that. But it explained it. "Will you testify?" Clara asked quietly. "If we can guarantee your safety, will you tell the truth about what the Thorntons made you do?" Martha hesitated, her whole body trembling. "They'll kill me," she said again. "Not if we get to them first." Nate's voice was hard as stone. "I have connections, Mrs. Griggs. Federal marshals, territorial judges. If you testify against the Thorntons, I can have you relocated somewhere they'll never find you. New name, new life, complete protection. And if I don't testify, then an innocent woman nearly died for a murder you committed. And the people who used you will get away with it. They'll keep getting away with it, using other desperate people to do their dirty work until someone stops them." Martha was silent for a long moment. Clara watched her struggle, watched the fear war with the guilt on her weathered face. Finally, the woman nodded. "I'll do it," she whispered. "God forgive me for all of it, but I'll do it." The ride back to the ranch took 3 days instead of 2. The weather turned vicious, forcing them to shelter in the abandoned cabin while a blizzard raged outside. Clara sat beside the fire, wrapped in every blanket they'd brought, while Nate fed wood into the flames. "We've got her." His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "We've got testimony linking the Thorntons directly to Thomas's murder. Once we get back, I'll send word to the federal marshal in Helena. And then we wait. The wheels of justice turn slowly, especially out here. It could take months before anything official happens. The Thorntons won't wait months." Clara stared into the fire. "Once they realize Martha has turned on them, they'll try to silence her, or come after us directly." "I know." Nate moved to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "That's why we need to be ready." "Ready for what?" For anything. He turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. Clara, I need you to promise me something. What? If something happens to me, if the Thorntons try something, and I can't protect you, I need you to run. Take whatever money you can and disappear. Start over somewhere they'll never find you. Clara felt cold. That had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. You think they'll try to kill you? I think Vincent Thornton is desperate, dangerous, and has nothing left to lose. I think his mother is ruthless enough to order anything if it means protecting her family. Nate's hand found hers. I've made enemies before. I can handle myself. But I can't handle watching you get hurt because of me. Then don't. Clara gripped his hand tightly. Don't watch. Fight beside me instead. Clara, I'm not running. Her voice was fierce. I ran from nothing my whole life. I won't start now. Whatever comes next, we face it together. That was the deal. Nate stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. Clara felt exhaustion pulling at her, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Nate, when this is over, when the Thorntons are dealt with and my name is cleared, what happens to us? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. What do you want to happen? Clara considered the question. A month ago she'd wanted nothing but survival. A week ago she'd wanted justice. But now, sitting in this frozen cabin with this scarred, complicated man, she found herself wanting something more. I want this to be real, she said quietly. Not just a marriage of convenience, not just protection. I want to build something with you, something that lasts. Nate's breath caught. Clara, I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. But somewhere between the gallows and here I started to feel things I wasn't expecting, things I wasn't ready for. What kind of things? Clara turned to face him close enough to see the firelight dancing in his gray eyes. The kind of things that scare me. The kind that make me want to run and stay at the same time. Nate reached up and cupped her face in his rough hands. I've been scared since the moment I saw you on that gallows, he admitted. Scared of losing you before I even had you. Scared that you'd leave as soon as the danger passed. Scared that I'd finally found something worth having and wouldn't know how to hold on to it. Then hold on. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Hold on and don't let go. He kissed her, then soft and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded. Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Some wall she'd built around her heart crumbling to dust. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nate pressed his forehead against hers. I think I'm falling in love with you. He said the words rough with emotion. Clara closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. I think I'm falling in love with you too. They held each other through the night, while the blizzard raged, two broken people finding wholeness in each other's arms. And when morning came pale and cold, they rose together to face whatever the future held. Side by side, partner to partner, the way it was always meant to be. They returned to the ranch on the fourth day, exhausted but triumphant. Martha Griggs rode between them on a borrowed horse, her thin frame hunched against the cold, her eyes darting nervously at every sound. Dolores met them at the door, her face tight with worry. Thank God you're back. She pulled Clara into a fierce embrace. There's been trouble. What kind of trouble? Nate's voice sharpened. Vincent Thornton. He came here 2 days ago with 6 men. Demanded we hand over Clara. Clara felt ice crawl through her veins. What happened? Hank and the boys turned them away. There was almost shooting, but Vincent backed down when he saw how many rifles we had pointed at him. Dolores crossed herself. He swore he'd be back. Said he'd burn this ranch to the ground before he let you make a fool of him. Nate's jaw tightened. Where's Hank now? Patrolling the North Ridge with most of the men. We've been running shifts since Vincent left. Nobody sleeps more than a few hours. Good. Nate turned to Clara. Get Martha inside and settled. I need to talk to my men." He strode off toward the barn, his shoulders rigid with tension. Clara watched him go, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her. "Come." Dolores took Martha's arm gently. "You look half frozen. Let's get you warm." Clara followed them inside, but her mind was elsewhere. Vincent had come to the ranch, had threatened to burn it down. Whatever protection Nate's name had offered it was eroding fast. The Thorntons were getting desperate, and desperate people did dangerous things. That night, after Martha had been fed and settled in a small room near Dolores's quarters, Clara found Nate in his study. He stood at the window, staring out at the darkness, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. "You should sleep," Clara said quietly. "Can't." He didn't turn around. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that gallows. I see you standing there with a rope around your neck." Clara moved to stand beside him. "That was weeks ago." "Doesn't matter. Some things don't fade." He finally looked at her, and the pain in his gray eyes made her heart clench. "I almost lost you before I even had you. I won't let that happen again." "You won't." Clara took his hand. "We have Martha's testimony. We have evidence. Once the federal marshal arrives—" "The marshal is 3 days away at best. A lot can happen in 3 days." "Then we'll be ready." Clara squeezed his fingers. "You said it yourself. This ranch is a fortress. Vincent can threaten all he wants, but he can't actually touch us here." "He can try." Nate set down his whiskey and turned to face her fully. "Clara, I need you to promise me something. Another promise about running?" "No." His voice was rough. "A promise about fighting. If something happens, if Vincent gets past my men, I need you to take one of the rifles from the gun cabinet and use it. Can you shoot?" "Thomas taught me. I'm not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at." "Good." Nate's hands came up to cup her face. "I won't always be able to protect you. You need to be able to protect yourself." "I know." Clara covered his hands with hers. "I'm not afraid, Nate." "You should be. Maybe. But I've already faced the worst thing I could imagine. I stood on that gallows and made peace with dying. After that," she shrugged, "Vincent Thornton doesn't scare me anymore. He's just a spoiled boy throwing a tantrum because he didn't get what he wanted." Something flickered in Nate's expression. Pride, maybe. Or love. "God, you're magnificent," he breathed. Then he was kissing her, fierce and desperate, and Clara kissed him back with equal intensity. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. She had to believe that. They made it through the night without incident, and the next night, and the one after that. By the 4th day, Clara had almost started to believe that Vincent's threats were empty bluster, that he'd realized the hopelessness of his position and retreated. She was wrong. The attack came at dawn on the 5th day, when the sky was just beginning to lighten, and most of the ranch hands were changing shifts. Clara was in the kitchen with Dolores helping prepare breakfast when the first shots rang out. "Get down!" Dolores grabbed Clara and pulled her to the floor as glass shattered above their heads. "Stay low!" More shots, shouting, the thunder of hooves. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Where's Nate?" "He went to check the east pasture an hour ago. He should be—" A door crashed open somewhere in the house. Heavy footsteps. Men's voices rough and urgent. "Find the women. Thornton wants them alive." Dolores's face went white. She grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her toward the back of the kitchen, toward a narrow door Clara had never noticed before. "Root cellar," Dolores whispered. "Hide. Don't come out until you hear Nate's voice." "What about you?" "I'll lead them away. Go." "Dolores, no." But the older woman was already pushing her through the door, shoving her down into darkness. The door closed above Clara's head, and she heard something heavy being dragged across it. Clara crouched in the blackness, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Above her, she heard Dolores's voice deliberately loud. "What do you want?" "There's no one here but me." "Where's the Brennan woman?" A man's voice, harsh and demanding. "She's not here. She left yesterday for Helena." "You're lying." A crash, a cry of pain. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. "I'll ask one more time." The man's voice was cold. "Where is Clara Brennan?" "Go to hell." Another crash, another cry. Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. If she revealed herself now, Dolores's sacrifice would be for nothing. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Clara lost track of time in the darkness. She heard more shots, more shouting. Smelled smoke. Fire. They were burning the house. Clara fumbled in the darkness, searching for another way out. The cellar was small, barely large enough to stand in, but her hands found a second door on the far wall. She pushed against it, and it swung open into blinding daylight. She stumbled out into chaos. The main house was burning flames, licking up the walls, black smoke billowing into the pale morning sky. Men on horseback circled the yard, firing at ranch hands who'd taken cover behind wagons and water troughs. And there, in the center of it all, stood Vincent Thornton. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. His face twisted into an ugly smile. "There she is." He spurred his horse toward her. "Get her." Clara ran. She didn't know where she was going, didn't have a plan. Her only thought was escape survival, putting distance between herself and the men hunting her. She made it to the barn before rough hands grabbed her from behind. "Got you." Hot breath against her ear. Vincent's voice, triumphant and cruel. "Did you really think you could run from me?" Clara twisted in his grip, trying to break free, but he was too strong. He spun her around to face him, and the hatred in his eyes made her blood freeze. "You ruined everything," he snarled. "My mother's plans, my future. Everything we've worked for gone because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Your mother murdered my husband." Clara's voice came out stronger than she felt. "She framed me for it. Did you think I'd just let that go? I thought you'd be smart enough to die when you were supposed to." Vincent's grip tightened, and Clara gasped in pain. "But no, you had to go and get yourself rescued by that bastard Prescott. Let her go." The voice came from behind them. Clara's heart leaped as she recognized it. Nate. Vincent spun, dragging Clara with him as a shield. Nate stood at the barn door, his rifle raised, his scarred face expressionless. "One more step and I'll snap her neck," Vincent warned. "You do that and you won't live long enough to regret it." Big talk from a man whose house is burning. Vincent laughed an ugly sound. "Where's your army now, Prescott? Where are all those men you bragged about?" "Dealing with yours." Nate's voice was ice. "You brought 6 guns. I've got 20. Your men are either dead or running. It's over, Thornton. Let her go." Vincent's arm tightened around Clara's throat. She could barely breathe. "It's not over until I say it's over." His voice was rising, cracking with hysteria. "Do you know what my mother did for me? Everything. She did everything to give me a future. And now it's gone. The railroad deal, the money, all of it. That's not Clara's fault. The hell it isn't." Vincent yanked Clara closer, and she felt something cold press against her temple. A gun. He had a gun to her head. "If she'd just married me when I asked, none of this would have happened. We'd have gotten the land, made the deal. Everyone would have been happy. Except Clara." Nate's rifle never wavered. "Because she'd have been married to a murderer." "I didn't kill anyone. Your mother did. Same thing." Vincent's hand was shaking. Clara could feel the tremors running through his body, the desperate energy of a man with nothing left to lose. "Put down the rifle," Vincent said, "or I swear to God I'll pull this trigger." Nate didn't move. "I said put it down." "Nate." Clara found her voice forced it past the pressure on her throat. "Do what he says." "Clara, please." She met his eyes across the distance between them. "Trust me." Something passed between them. An understanding. A plan formed in an instant. Slowly, Nate lowered his rifle, set it on the ground. "Kick it away." He kicked it. "Now back up. Hands where I can see them." Nate raised his hands and took a step backward, then another. Vincent's grip on Clara loosened slightly. Just enough. Clara moved. She threw her elbow back into Vincent's ribs with all the strength she had. He grunted, his arm dropping from her throat, and Clara twisted away from him, dropping to the ground as Nate surged forward. The gunshot was deafening. Clara screamed. But it wasn't Nate who fell. It was Vincent, crumpling to the ground with a look of shock on his face, a red stain spreading across his chest. Behind him, still smoking gun in her trembling hands, stood Martha Griggs. "I couldn't let him hurt anyone else." The older woman's voice was barely a whisper. "I couldn't let them win." Clara scrambled to her feet and ran to Nate, throwing herself into his arms. He caught her, held her tight, his whole body shaking. "I thought I lost you." His voice was ragged. "I thought—" "I'm here." Clara pressed her face against his chest. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." They stood there for a long moment, clinging to each other while the world burned around them. Then Nate pulled back his hands, cupping her face. "We need to move. The fire's spreading." Clara nodded, still dazed. "Dolores, she's in the house." They heard her. Nate's face hardened. "Hank, get water on that fire, and someone find Dolores." Men materialized from the smoke, responding to his commands. Clara watched in a daze as buckets were organized. Horses were rounded up, and the chaos slowly began to resolve into order. They found Dolores unconscious in the kitchen, bruised but alive. By some miracle, the fire hadn't reached her. 2 ranch hands carried her out, and Clara followed her legs, barely holding her upright. The main house was a loss. By the time they got the fire under control, most of the upper floor had collapsed. But the barn was intact, and the bunkhouse and the small cottage where Dolores lived. It could have been worse. It could have been so much worse. Vincent Thornton was dead. His men were scattered, most of them captured by Nate's ranch hands. And somewhere in Silver Creek, Ida Thornton was about to learn that her son's desperate gamble had failed. As the sun rose fully over the smoldering ruins of the ranch house, Clara stood beside Nate and surveyed the damage. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Nate looked at her sharply. "For what?" "This." She gestured at the destruction. "Your home, your life. All of this happened because of me." "No." Nate's voice was firm. "This happened because the Thorntons are murderers and thieves. This happened because evil people thought they could get away with destroying innocent lives." He took her hand. "None of this is your fault, Clara. Not one bit of it. But your house can be rebuilt." He pulled her close. "Houses are just wood and nails. What matters is that you're alive. That we're all alive. That's what can't be replaced." Clara leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid warmth. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for the federal marshal. We give him Martha's testimony, show him the evidence we've gathered, and we watch Ida Thornton face justice for what she's done." "Do you think she will face justice, I mean?" Nate was quiet for a moment. "I think she doesn't have a choice anymore. With Vincent dead and Martha willing to testify, her options have run out. She can flee, but she won't get far. She can fight, but she doesn't have the resources. Or she can surrender and hope for mercy. She doesn't deserve mercy. No." Nate's voice was hard. "She doesn't." Dolores woke that afternoon groggy and sore, but coherent. Clara sat by her bedside, holding her hand, crying tears of relief. "I thought they'd killed you," Clara whispered, "when I heard you fall. Takes more than a few cowards to kill this old woman." Dolores squeezed her hand weakly. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "No. I'm fine, thanks to you." "And Mr. Nate?" "He's outside coordinating the cleanup. The house is—" Clara swallowed. "The house is gone, but everyone survived." "Houses can be rebuilt." Dolores echoed Nate's words with a tired smile. "People cannot." The federal marshal arrived 3 days later, accompanied by a territorial judge and half a dozen armed men. Marshal James Hardin was a stern-faced man in his 50s who listened to everything without expression, reviewed the evidence without comment, and asked questions with the precision of a surgeon. Martha Griggs gave her testimony in full, her voice trembling but clear. She described how Ida Thornton had recruited her, how she'd been given the arsenic, with instructions to add it to Thomas Brennan's food in small doses over several weeks. She described Vincent's threats, his promises of money, his assurances that no one would ever know. When she finished, Marshal Hardin sat in silence for a long moment. "Mrs. Griggs, you understand that what you've described makes you an accessory to murder." Martha's face went gray, but she nodded. "Yes, sir, I know." "And you're willing to testify to all of this in a court of law?" "Yes, sir." The marshal turned to Nate. "Mr. Prescott, you mentioned you could ensure this witness's safety." "I did, and I can. Once this is over, Mrs. Griggs will be relocated to California under a new name. I have contacts there who'll make sure she's taken care of." "Very well." Hardin stood. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm issuing a warrant for the arrest of Ida Thornton on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, perjury, and attempted murder." He looked at Clara. "Mrs. Prescott, you'll need to testify at the trial. Are you prepared for that?" Clara felt Nate's hand close over hers. She drew a deep breath. "Yes," she said. "I'm prepared." The arrest of Ida Thornton was the talk of the territory. A dozen armed men rode into Silver Creek and took her from her own parlor, still dressed in her mourning clothes, still protesting her innocence in shrill, outraged tones. Clara wasn't there to see it. She stayed at the ranch with Nate, helping to sort through the salvageable items from the burned house, planning the reconstruction building, something new from the ashes of the old. But she heard about it from Reverend Cole, who rode out specifically to share the news. "They found evidence in her house," he said, sitting in Dolores's small parlor with a cup of coffee, warming his hands. "Letters, financial records, a whole ledger detailing payments to various people for various services." He shook his head. Martha Griggs wasn't the only one Ida employed for dirty work. She had her fingers in half the corruption in the territory. "What about the people she paid off?" Nate asked. "The judge. The sheriff. Judge Crawford has resigned and left the territory. Probably smart of him, considering the charges he might face if he stayed." Reverend Cole's expression was grim. "Sheriff Hutchins is claiming he didn't know anything. Says he was just following orders." "He nearly let them hang me." Clara's voice was flat. "I know, and he'll have to live with that. But proving he was part of the conspiracy?" The Reverend shrugged. "That's harder." "What about the town?" Clara asked. "The people who stood there and watched, who called for my death." Reverend Cole was quiet for a moment. "Some of them are ashamed. Some are pretending it never happened. And some—" he sighed. "Some are still convinced you must have done something wrong, or none of this would have happened." Clara felt anger flare in her chest, but Nate's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "It doesn't matter what they think," he said quietly. "The truth is the truth, regardless of who believes it." "He's right." Reverend Cole leaned forward. "Clara, the people who matter, the ones with good hearts and open minds, they know the truth. They know what was done to you, and they're grateful you survived to expose the evil in our midst." "That's something, I suppose." "It's more than something." The Reverend smiled gently. "It's a new beginning. For you, for the town, for all of us." The trial took place in Helena 3 weeks after Ida Thornton's arrest. Clara testified for 2 days, recounting everything from Thomas's illness, to the accusation, to the gallows. She kept her voice steady through all of it, even when the memories threatened to overwhelm her. Nate sat in the front row every day, his eyes never leaving her face. His presence was an anchor keeping her grounded when the waves of the past threatened to pull her under. Martha Griggs testified as well, her confession damning and detailed. Other witnesses came forward, people who had seen or suspected things over the years, but had been too afraid to speak. In the end, it took the jury less than an hour to deliver their verdict. Guilty. Ida Thornton received a sentence of life imprisonment. She screamed as they led her away, promising revenge, swearing that Clara would pay for destroying her family. Clara watched her go and felt nothing but exhaustion. It was over. Finally, completely over. Outside the courthouse in the pale winter sunshine, Nate pulled her into his arms. "How do you feel?" he asked. Clara considered the question. She'd expected to feel triumph, or relief, or satisfaction. Instead, she felt hollow, drained, like she'd been running for months and had finally stopped. "I feel tired," she said honestly. "Tired of fighting. Tired of being afraid. Tired of having to prove I'm not a monster." "Then let's go home." Nate pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Let's go home and rest, and rebuild, and start living instead of just surviving." Home. The word felt strange and wonderful at the same time. Clara had lost her home the day the sheriff had dragged her from her bed. She'd been homeless ever since even living in Nate's grand house. But now, with the trial behind her and the truth finally known, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt like she belonged. "Yes," she said, leaning into her husband's embrace. "Let's go home." The ride back to the ranch took 2 days. They traveled slowly, stopping often, in no hurry to return to the chaos of reconstruction. Clara found herself savoring the quiet moments, the peaceful stretches of trail, where it was just her and Nate and the wide Montana sky. One evening, camped beside a frozen creek, Nate produced a small wooden box from his saddlebag. "I've been waiting for the right moment," he said, his voice unusually hesitant. "I'm not sure there is a right moment, but this feels close." Clara took the box, her heart quickening. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a ring. Simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's." Nate's voice was rough. "She gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for someone worth giving it to." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "Nate." "I know we're already married. I know we did things backward and sideways and nothing like they should have been done." He took her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger. "But I wanted you to have this. Because you're worth it, Clara. You're worth everything." Clara stared at the ring on her finger, at the way the sapphire caught the firelight. Then she looked up at her husband, at his scarred face and uncertain eyes, at the vulnerability he so rarely showed. "I love you," she said. The words came out easily, naturally, as if she'd been saying them all her life. Nate's breath caught. "Clara." "I love you, Nathaniel Prescott. I didn't expect to. I didn't want to. But somewhere between the gallows and now you became everything to me. My protector, my partner, my home." She reached up and touched his scarred cheek, the way she'd done that first night in the cabin. "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what we'll build together, or what challenges we'll face. But I know that I want to face them with you. All of them. For as long as I live." Nate gathered her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I love you too." His voice was rough with emotion. "I've loved you since the moment I saw you standing on that gallows, refusing to break. I just didn't have the words for it. You have them now." "I do." He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes shining. "I love you, Clara Prescott. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it." They held each other beside the fire, the stars wheeling overhead, the future stretching before them, full of possibility. The past was behind them. Its horrors survived, its lessons learned. What lay ahead was theirs to build. Together. They returned to the ranch on a gray February morning, the sky heavy with the promise of more snow. Clara had braced herself for the sight of the burned house, but seeing it again still sent a pang through her chest. The shell of the main building stood like a skeleton against the winter sky. Blackened beams, reaching toward clouds that seemed close enough to touch. Workers were already swarming over the ruins, clearing debris, preparing for reconstruction. "We'll build it better this time." Nate's hand found hers as they rode into the yard. "Bigger, stronger. A house worthy of the woman who'll live in it." Clara squeezed his fingers. "I don't need big or fancy. I just need home." "You'll have both." Dolores met them at the door of her cottage, which had become the temporary headquarters for the ranch. She looked tired, but determined, her arm still in a sling from the injuries she'd sustained during the attack. "Welcome back." She pulled Clara into a careful embrace. "The whole territory's been talking about the trial. You did good, mija. You did real good. I couldn't have done any of it without you." Clara felt tears threaten. "Without all of you." "That's what family does." Dolores stepped back, her dark eyes bright. "Now come inside. I've got food warming and news to share." The news was this: in the weeks since Ida Thornton's arrest, Silver Creek had begun to change. The people who had called for Clara's death were slowly, painfully confronting what they'd almost done. Some had left town unable to face their neighbors. Others had simply gone quiet, their shame a weight they carried in silence. But a brave few, had done something remarkable. "They're calling it the Brennan Fund." Dolores set a bowl of stew in front of Clara. "The families whose children you taught, the ones who signed that letter supporting you. They've been collecting money. For the rebuilding." Clara stared at her. "What?" "Nearly $200 so far. And more coming in every day." Dolores smiled. "They want to make amends, Clara. They want you to know that not everyone in Silver Creek turned against you." Clara didn't know what to say. The thought of those families, the ones who had believed in her even when the rest of the town was howling for her blood, gathering their hard-earned money to help rebuild. It was almost too much to process. "I don't deserve this." "You deserve more." Nate's voice was firm. "You deserve every good thing that comes your way. And I intend to make sure you get it." The reconstruction began in earnest the following week. Nate had hired the best builders in the territory, men who knew how to construct houses that would stand against Montana's brutal winters. Clara threw herself into the planning, determined to be part of every decision. "I want a big kitchen," she told Nate one evening, spreading sketches across the table in Dolores's cottage. "With windows that face east so I can watch the sunrise while I cook." "You don't have to cook. That's what we have Dolores for." "I want to cook. I like cooking. Thomas always said my biscuits were the best he'd ever tasted." Something softened in Nate's expression at the mention of her first husband. In the months since their marriage, Clara had learned to speak of Thomas without pain, to honor his memory without letting it shadow her present. "Then you'll have the biggest kitchen in the territory." Nate pulled her close. "With windows facing east and south and any other direction you want." "And a room for children." The words slipped out before Clara could stop them. She felt heat flood her cheeks, felt Nate go still beside her. "Children." His voice was careful, neutral. "Someday. Maybe. If you want them." Clara couldn't meet his eyes. "I know we haven't talked about it. I know our marriage started as something else. But I thought now that things are settled, now that we have a future." "Clara?" Nate tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. "I want children. I want a family. I want everything with you." "You do?" "I've wanted it since the moment you agreed to marry me. I just didn't want to pressure you." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You'd already been through so much. I wanted to give you time to heal." "I've healed." Clara's voice was fierce. "I'm still healing, but I don't want to wait anymore, Nate. I've spent too much of my life waiting for the right moment, waiting for things to get easier, waiting for permission to be happy. And now I'm done waiting." She rose on her toes and kissed him soft and sure. "Now I'm ready to live." Spring came slowly to Montana, the snow reluctantly surrendering to pale sunshine and tentative green. The new house rose from the ashes of the old, its frame taking shape day by day, its promise becoming reality. Clara watched the progress with a mixture of awe and gratitude. A year ago she'd been a struggling seamstress, barely making ends meet, watching her husband die by inches. Now she was married to one of the wealthiest men in the territory, building a home that would have seemed like a palace to her younger self. But it wasn't the wealth that mattered. It wasn't the house or the land or the cattle. It was Nate. It was the way he looked at her every morning like she was the most precious thing in the world. It was the way he listened when she spoke, really listened as if her thoughts and opinions actually mattered. It was the partnership they'd built, the trust they'd earned, the love they'd grown into. It was belonging at last to someone who belonged to her. One afternoon in late April, Clara rode into Silver Creek for the first time since the trial. Nate had offered to come with her, but she'd refused. "This is something I need to do alone." "Are you sure those people almost killed me? But if I let that fear rule me forever, they win." Clara had squared her shoulders. "I won't give them that power." So she rode into town alone, her heart hammering in her chest, but her head held high. The streets were quiet, the morning sun casting long shadows across the muddy road. People stopped what they were doing to stare as she passed. Clara met their eyes without flinching. Some looked away quickly, shame evident in the set of their shoulders. Others nodded cautiously, uncertain of their welcome. A few, the braver ones, actually spoke. "Mrs. Prescott." James Whitfield stepped out of his general store, his hat in his hands. "I was hoping you'd come back." Clara reined her horse to a stop. "Mr. Whitfield." "I wanted to apologize for what I did, what I didn't do." He couldn't meet her eyes. "I stood there and watched them drag you to that gallows. I didn't say a word. I didn't lift a finger." "No, you didn't. I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "I know it doesn't mean much now. I know sorry doesn't undo what happened. But I need you to know that I'm ashamed. That I'll be ashamed for the rest of my life." Clara studied him for a long moment. This man who had been her customer for years, who had bought dresses from her for his wife and daughters, who had smiled at her on Sunday mornings and wished her good day, who had stood silent while a mob tried to murder her. "I accept your apology," she said finally. "But I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Whitfield flinched. "I understand." "Do you—" Clara leaned forward in her saddle. "Do you understand what it felt like to stand on that platform with a rope around my neck, looking at faces I'd known for years, faces I'd trusted? Do you understand what it means to have your entire community decide you deserve to die?" "I can't imagine." "No, you can't." Clara's voice was cold. "And I hope you never have to. I hope no one in this town ever has to experience what I experienced. But if they do, if someone else is ever accused of something they didn't do, I hope you remember this moment. I hope you remember that staying silent makes you complicit." She straightened in her saddle. "Good day, Mr. Whitfield." She rode on without looking back. Her destination was the small cemetery on the edge of town. Thomas's grave was near the back, marked by a simple wooden cross that Clara had paid for with the last of her savings. She dismounted and knelt in the new spring grass, her fingers tracing the letters carved into the wood. "Hello, Thomas." Her voice was soft. "It's been a while." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and new growth. "I found out the truth. About how you died. About what they did to you." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I didn't know." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Nate's been good to me. I think you'd like him. I think you'd be glad I found someone to take care of me." A watery laugh. "Not that I need taking care of. You always said I was too stubborn for my own good." She pulled a small bundle of wildflowers from her saddlebag and laid them at the base of the cross. "I'm building a new life now. A good life. And I wanted you to know that I'm okay. That I survived. That the people who hurt you, who hurt us, they're paying for what they did." She pressed her palm flat against the earth, feeling the cold ground beneath her fingers. "I'll always love you, Thomas. I'll always be grateful for the years we had. But I'm letting go now. I'm letting myself be happy." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I hope that's okay. I hope you understand." She stayed there for a long time, kneeling in the grass, remembering the man who had been her first husband. The quiet one, the steady one, the one who had loved her in his own reserved way and had deserved so much better than the death he'd received. When she finally rose, she felt lighter. as if she'd set down a burden she'd been carrying for months without realizing it. "Goodbye, Thomas." She touched the cross one last time. "Rest easy." She mounted her horse and rode home to her husband. The new house was finished in June, just as the summer heat was beginning to settle over the territory. It was everything Clara had asked for, and more, a sprawling structure with large windows and high ceilings, and a kitchen that made Dolores weep with joy. They held a celebration to mark the occasion, inviting everyone who had stood by them through the darkness: Reverend Cole and his wife, Hank and the other ranch hands, the families who had contributed to the Brennan Fund, Martha Griggs, who had testified at such great personal cost and was now preparing to leave for her new life in California. Clara stood on the wide front porch watching the festivities, feeling a peace she'd almost forgotten was possible. "What are you thinking?" Nate appeared at her shoulder, 2 glasses of lemonade in his hands. "I'm thinking that a year ago I was a widow with nothing. No home, no future, no hope." Clara took the glass he offered. "And now look at me." "I'm always looking at you." Nate's voice was soft. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Flatterer. Truth-teller. He clinked his glass against hers. "To new beginnings." To new beginnings. They drank in companionable silence, watching their guests laugh and talk and enjoy the summer evening. "I have something to tell you." Clara's heart was racing. She'd been waiting for the right moment all day. Nate turned to her, his expression curious. "What is it?" "I saw Dr. Patterson last week, when you were in Helena." Something flickered in Nate's eyes. Worry, maybe, or fear. "Are you all right? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Clara set down her glass and took his hands. "Everything's right. Everything's perfect." "Clara, you're scaring me." "I'm pregnant." The word hung in the air between them. Nate stared at her, his face frozen in an expression she couldn't read. "Pregnant," he repeated slowly. "Yes." Dr. Patterson confirmed it. "About 2 months along, he thinks." Clara searched his face. "Say something. Please." "I'm going to be a father." "Yes." "We're going to have a baby." "Yes." Nate's face transformed. Joy broke across his features like sunrise over the mountains, brilliant and overwhelming. He swept Clara into his arms, lifting her off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed and clutched at his shoulders. "We're going to have a baby." He set her down carefully, his hands moving to cradle her still flat stomach. "Clara, this is everything. This is more than everything. I was hoping you'd be happy." "Happy?" Nate's voice cracked. "I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and elated and grateful, and so many things I don't have words for." "That sounds about right." Clara covered his hands with hers. "I feel the same way." They stood there on the porch of their new home, hands intertwined over the new life growing between them, while the summer sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. "I love you," Nate said quietly. "I love you too. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you and this baby have everything you need, everything you deserve." "I already have everything I need." Clara reached up to touch his scarred cheek. "I have you." The baby came in February, on a night so cold the windows frosted over with ice. Clara labored for 16 hours, Dolores at her side, while Nate wore a path in the parlor floor pacing. When the cry finally came thin and strong, Nate burst into the room without waiting for permission. "Is she all right? Is the baby—" "They're both fine." Dolores stepped aside, revealing Clara propped against the pillows, a small bundle cradled in her arms. Nate approached the bed slowly, as if afraid of disturbing something sacred. He looked down at his wife and child, and Clara saw tears slip down his weathered cheeks. "It's a boy," Clara said softly. "A perfect, healthy boy." Nate reached out with trembling fingers to touch the baby's face. The infant stirred, yawning, his tiny hand grasping at the air. "He's so small." "He'll grow," Clara smiled. They always do. What should we name him? Clara had been thinking about this for months. She'd considered her father's name, her mother's maiden name, even Thomas's name, as a way to honor the man who had brought her and Nate together. But in the end, there was only one choice that felt right. Daniel, she said. I want to name him Daniel. Nate's breath caught. His brother's name, the one he'd lost, the one whose death had haunted him for a decade. Clara, he was important to you. He's part of your story. And now he'll be part of our son's story, too. Clara reached for Nate's hand. Is that okay? Nate couldn't speak. He simply nodded, tears streaming freely now, and gathered his wife and son into his arms. Daniel Prescott grew like a weed, healthy and strong, and curious about everything. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. Clara threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she'd brought to everything else in her life. She nursed Daniel through fevers, and teething taught him his letters and numbers, took him on long rides through the ranch lands to show him the empire his father had built. And she loved him. God, how she loved him. More than she'd ever loved anything or anyone except perhaps the man who had given him to her. The years passed, marked by seasons and milestones. Daniel's first steps, his first words. His first day at the school, Clara had finally built on the ranch, fulfilling the dream she'd carried since her days as a teacher in Silver Creek. Other children came too. A daughter they named Sarah for Nate's mother. Another son they called Thomas, for the man who had started it all. The big house filled with noise and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of a growing family. Clara watched her children grow and marveled at the life she'd built from the ashes of destruction. She was 40 years old now, with gray threading through her auburn hair and lines around her eyes from years of smiling. She was healthy, happy, surrounded by people who loved her. She was home. One evening in late autumn, 10 years after the day Nate had pulled her from the gallows, Clara stood on the porch of their home and watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. Nate found her there, as he always did. His hair was more silver than dark. Now his face more weathered, but his eyes still held that same intensity that had captured her from the very beginning. What are you thinking about? He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. I'm thinking about how far we've come. Clara leaned into his warmth. About everything we've survived, everything we've built. Any regrets? Not a single one. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the colors shift and deepen across the sky. I was scared, you know. Nate's voice was soft. That day in Silver Creek, when I saw you on that gallows, I was more scared than I'd ever been in my life. Of what? Of being too late. Of failing you the way I failed Daniel. His arms tightened around her. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost you before I even had the chance to know you. Clara turned in his arms facing him. But you didn't lose me. You saved me, and then you gave me a life I never could have imagined. You saved yourself, Clara. I just gave you the opportunity. Then thank you for the opportunity. She rose on her toes and kissed him soft and familiar and full of love. Thank you for believing I was worth saving. You were worth everything. Nate's voice was rough with emotion. You still are. You always will be. From inside the house they heard Daniel calling for them. Dinner was ready. The children were hungry. Life in all its beautiful, mundane glory was waiting. Clara took her husband's hand and led him inside into the warmth and light of the home they'd built together. She thought about the woman she'd been 10 years ago, terrified, alone, standing on a gallows with a rope around her neck, waiting to die for a crime she didn't commit. She thought about the journey from that moment to this one, all the pain and fear and grief she'd had to walk through to get here, and she thought about what she'd learned along the way. That destruction could become creation. That lies could be overcome by truth. That the worst moments of our lives could lead us to the best ones if we had the courage to keep going. That love, real love, was worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. She'd lost everything once. Her home, her reputation, her husband, her hope. She'd been stripped down to nothing, reduced to a name, on an accusation, a body on a gallows, a woman the world had decided to destroy. But she hadn't been destroyed. She'd been transformed. Clara Prescott gathered her children around the dinner table, her husband at her side, her home warm against the autumn chill. She looked at the faces she loved, at the life she'd built, at the future, stretching out before them, full of possibility, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had won. Not against Ida Thornton or Vincent, or the mob that had tried to kill her. That victory was old news, settled and done. She had won against the darkness itself, against the fear that had tried to consume her, against the despair that had whispered she would never be happy again. She had won by surviving, by thriving, by refusing to let her worst day define the rest of her days. She had won by choosing hope over fear, love over bitterness, life over death. And that victory, hard-earned and precious, would last forever. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Inside, Clara's family gathered around her, laughing and talking and living. This was her story. Not the gallows, not the accusations, not the trial. This, right here, right now. A woman who had been broken and remade. A family built from ashes. A love that had defied every odd. This was her truth. And no one would ever take it from her again.